Good evening and welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast.
I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury.
As November progresses, the latest episode of the podcast, our focus this week against the backdrop of all sorts of cabinet reshuffle shenaniganery and threats to world peace. We're going to focus in closer to home, looking at Portsmouth and perhaps what should be the first line of healthcare provision. We've had a pharmacy summit this week in Portsmouth, and we have got a very esteemed guest to give us the inside track. Simon, would you like to introduce?
So we are joined again by a friend of the pod, Cllr Matthew Winnington, who is the cabinet member for health, wellbeing and social care on Portsmouth City Council. Good evening, Matthew, and welcome back.
Thanks very much. Lovely to be here.
Thank you.
So thank you. Every time you come back, your title seems to get a little bit longer with something else tacked on. I'm sure I'm not imagining that, but if you could first of all give us a quick insight into what this pharmacy summit was and why was it called?
Yeah, and I say thanks so much for being here. We called the summit. This actually came from something I had a year off the council. And an enforced year off, as people will know if they follow the election results. But I came back, and there was already some concern that had been going through the Health and Wellbeing boards about pharmacies closing in the city. And one of the first things that came back, and part of my role as cabinet member for Community Wellbeing, Health and Care, is that I'm also the co-chair of the Health and Wellbeing boards. And at the time, Councillor Gerald Jackson was still leader of the council and is on the Health and Wellbeing board. That's one of their leaders' responsibilities to sit on that board. And he'd been bringing up about the fact that there's these closures, what can we do about it? And there's this thing called the pharmaceutical needs assessment. And at the time, the needs assessment didn't allow you to take any stance against any closures of your pharmacies in the area. In my first year back, the law changed, and we could then start to actually say, we don't think that we should have gaps in our pharmacy provision. So really, it all started with that. And then earlier this calendar year, we were sort of talking this through, and I was talking to Councillor Vernon Jackson, and this came on the back of the fact we'd done a GP summit two GP summits last year. So we did one in August and then a follow-up in January, so in the last municipal year. And then we were planning on doing another one, and in discussion with Gerald and with partners, we thought, well, why don't we do one about pharmacies, because we have these issues with closures. We know that pharmacies have very similar situations and issues in terms of staffing as GPs do. So really, it was a case, and also they can often feel like the forgotten part of primary care. So when people think of primary care, they think of their GP surgeries, or as we try to get people to think about them, they're more than just GPs, so medical centres, so nurses, occupational therapists, physios, all that kind of thing that you get your surgeries, but also you think there's opticians and dentists as well. But pharmacies are actually a really key part of primary care. So that was really the reason behind saying, let's give them some priority and let's give them some attention. And but they have very different issues from a lot of others, because in the end, they are not only part of the primary care system, they're also straight up businesses as well.
So what did you hope to achieve by bringing everybody together?
So it was very much a case of let's see what their issues are, and we know from the GP surgery, the GP summits we've done, we've had some really practical outcomes. These are what's known in the trade as wicked issues. They're not things you can solve easily. They're not things you can do, and a lot of the things that happen are things you can't control because they're national legislation. their national policy. But it's about really getting through that and going, well, what can we actually achieve in Portsmouth ourselves? How can we work together on this? So really for us, the first thing we did a round table back in at the end of September, and that was something that we did alongside the pharmacists themselves, and really said to them, you tell us what your issues are. And then that really led us forward to say, right, you've told us what the issues are. What can then we put there as the 4 areas to prioritise in there? And some of those issues that came out were things that, to be honest, I did not have an idea that was such an issue, but actually made complete sense. So one of them was safety. So they were having an issue with pharmacies. Obviously, late night pharmacies are often the only place that's open, or one of the few places that's open at that time of night. But they're certainly the only ones where people think it's a healthcare professional, someone I can trust. They also have drugs in there, obviously. They're pharmacists. And also they often have people who are in severe distress, and that's at all times of the day when they're open. So one of the key things that we wanted to do was make sure that the police were there, and they were, and that we could address some of those particular issues there. So that's just an example. As one of the things we really wanted to sort of have practical solutions.
No, we'll definitely pick some more of those up in a little bit more detail later in the podcast.
So what sorts? Who was basically there in management speak? That's who were the stakeholders, I guess. But who goes to that sorts of things? You talked about police, but who were the others? Who were the other parties that were present?
So we had everyone. So we had in terms of thinking about the statutory sector. So obviously we as a city council were hosting it, but we do it under the umbrella of Health and Care Portsmouth, which of course includes the city council, all of the healthcare system in the city, the NHS, also the Hive these days as well, which is great. But then we were also including further afield, so the integrated care boards across Hampshire, Isle of Wight, because that's a really key thing, because their responsibility for pharmacies goes up through them. We had the community pharmacies South Central, so they're like the kind of professional body for our community pharmacists in the area. We had pharmacists coming in from the hospital, because though they're not community pharmacists, they do obviously have that professional connection. But then we were looking at things I said about business. So a real key one for us was to have Shaping Portsmouth there, which of course brings business from across the city, because one of the things that came up at the round table was, are you connected in with the business community? No, we're not connecting in with that business community. So getting that side of it as well, because obviously that can really help them in terms of how to develop their business side as well. And then obviously we had pharmacists themselves, people from the pharmacy providers, so the businesses that run pharmacies. We had a couple of students there, so a pharmacy student and actually a law student, and she actually came because she wanted to come and get a bit more of an idea of the way that local systems work, political systems, all this kind of thing. So that was really positive. And then we had other parts of sort of the local community in terms of so we had GPs represented and etc. So it was a real cross section of the people that can make a difference to how community pharmacy works.
So if we look at that, Matt, and you touched on it earlier, what were the key themes coming out in terms of those key issues that the pharmacies and the service providers were facing?
Yeah, so we said about, obviously we had that, I mentioned about the mental health and safety themes. So we actually looked at those together. So we did sort of one table on each of these. We had about how they can connect more into the community as a whole. So how can they both and that's when we're looking at the business community, but also in the high street, how can they sort of become partners there? We were looking at, so from 2026, every pharmacist who qualifies will be what they call a prescribing pharmacist, as a professional qualification. So they can then prescribe medication rather than just dispense it. The skill set actually that current pharmacists have mean that it's one of those things where you get a piece of paper. Almost every current pharmacist could do that, but you have to have accreditation to be a prescribing pharmacist. So one of the issues that was being brought up was they don't know how to. Sorry, it's very difficult to get that certification because there's a lack of people who can do that training. So it's about how we can move through with that, but also how to make the most of that. And then we were looking at workforce. So that side of things on how do we increase our workforce? Because like with GPs, like with other things, we have real issues with recruitment and indeed retention. So what can we do within that system to make Portsmouth an attractive place, A, to come to, and B, to stay in as pharmacists?
So did you look at any of this through the sort of lens of the customer, in terms of how they perceive pharmacies?
Absolutely. So one of the things that came back from that very beginning point about why should we do this, and that we did in the round table, and that we did obviously in there, was the fact that, and Gerald did. I asked Gerald to do the introduction because he'd been there from that very beginning, and it all came for him from that original point of view of the people talking to him, saying, I've tried to use my pharmacy for this, I've really worried that this is closed down, and all that kind of side. And we know if we start getting gaps in our provision around the city, we know for those people who need to use pharmacists on a regular basis for their medication, they tend to be the least mobile people of all. That it's all about how we can make better use of them in terms of so people can feel like they're not imposing on their pharmacists, but also when they're being told, oh, rather than go to your surgery, go to a pharmacist, that pharmacists are actually going to have the capacity to see them. So otherwise, there's no point. But also, most importantly, we know that people have relationships with their pharmacists. Yeah, we all have to get medication one time or another, and if you're getting your medication all the time, you get to have a relationship, whether you're getting it delivered to you in your homes or whether you're going in and collecting it on that regular basis. They're someone you can trust, and they are a trusted part of our high street. And trust levels for pharmacists are very high. So it's very much on what can we do, A, to improve that, because as much as there is a lot of trust, for some it kind of falls down and people have poor experiences. But also B, you want to make sure that they keep it up. One of the big things that happened in recent times, for example, was lack of medication. So you would maybe go to your pharmacist and be told, we haven't actually got that in now. There were huge supply issues, especially not long after Brexit in particular. And though the things have improved now, you still do have some. And pharmacists don't necessarily always work together as well as they could do. And again, that's not because it's not because of any malice or we're in competition with each other, therefore we shouldn't. It's just there haven't been those structures in place over the years to really have that way of working together as well.
You seem to have touched on some really big issues there, and I think the word was the word you used, wicked problems.
Yeah.
Are those things within the gift of PCC or the Cabinet Member for Health, Wellbeing and all other general goodness? Is it within your gift to influence and to change that?
I think the whole point is it's not about me or the cabinet. It's about using our ability to bring people together, and so we can bring those people who can make that difference, because we're absolutely not in a position where we can wave a magic wand. But at the same time, we are in a position whereby and this has been the case with both this and with the GP Summit as well. We are there to represent the people of this city, and we go on their feedback. You know, the GP Summit on the same theme. That was all about people's concerns, what people have brought to us. You know, myself and other members of the cabinet, but also all councillors, all 42, have had people who have had issues with accessing a GP, etc., etc. So it's one of those things where you've got the opportunity, you've got the responsibility almost that you can bring people together, and by the attendance that we had, it shows that people are receptive to that and really value it as something, and recognise that we do have that ability to do things. So it's very much about bringing it together. And actually, the people you're having at these summits, they're the experts. They know far more about this stuff than any of us. But often, they only, lots of different parts have only part of the knowledge, that they actually learn things. So it's about bringing that into almost a crucible whereby real positive solutions can come out the other end.
Excellent.
Okay, that almost segues beautifully into our next question. So pharmacies are a private business, and the funding model is probably quite confusing to most people. What effect does that in itself, that operating model, have on the problems that they face and the sorts of solutions that are going to be needed to help tackle the sorts of issues that you were talking about just now?
Yeah, I think that pharmacies are very, very unique, because they have a funding stream which is entirely from the public sector, which is all about the prescriptions they dispense. So all those medications they dispense with prescription, with there's contracts to do things like vaccinations and other things. So they have this big public sector, obviously, funding, but that's for very specific things. But then they also have all those other things that people go to their pharmacist for. So you think of all your over-the-counter medication. A lot of people we know go to pharmacists because, especially when they want to try something new, they go to a pharmacist because they say, right, we need some advice before we do it, even if it's over the counter. Or the only place you can get that particular over-the-counter medicine is from a pharmacist, because though it might be something you can do without a prescription, it's still kind of one that you should take on advice. You know, you don't want to be taking eye drops, for example, that you've never had before, that might be, have some particular side effects for some people, without talking to your pharmacist. So, they're the ones that tend to sit behind the counter. And then there's, as we said, there's other ones that you have to buy from a pharmacist. So, but that's a commercial side, isn't it? So, and then there's all those other things that people go, toothpaste and cleaning things and all kinds of bits and pieces. So they've got this balance, because you could be incredibly successful in terms of gathering things from the public sector, but then again, you can probably never really control exactly how much you get, because you never know how many prescriptions you're going to dispense. But if your sort of supply, your other side is completely failing through the floor, then you might just say, well, commercially we'll have to close, or vice versa. So that was one of the things about why to bring them in with the business community, and actually get the business community out the summits and get them to, so they've got that expertise to help them with that. And I was talking to Steph Nieltowski from Shaping Portsmouth afterwards, and he was so pleased, A, to have been invited, but B, to sort of had a handle in with that part of the business community, to help them, so they can help them as a organisation thrive, because obviously they support all parts of our business community, from your smallest micro enterprise right up to the massive organisations like BAE Systems, and other of our big commercial enterprises that operate in the city. So it is a very difficult thing, and I think we're going to come on to funding in a bit. But yeah, obviously the funding streams are extremely complicated, and like with a lot of bureaucracy, can be extremely difficult to navigate as well.
Yeah, because I mean, Ian and I both live in Cosham, so the Boots on the High Street has just recently closed. I've heard about some of the pharmacies that are concessions in supermarkets. They're kind of withdrawing for that. Are they pointing to kind of particular things about how they're funded that kind of cause those decisions, or are they just to do with the wider, perhaps the wider retail environment?
It's not clear. I think so. You're right about obviously Boots, and Boots are doing they're rationalising, as they call it, and I think they are looking at that high street, because obviously it's not just the pharmacy that's closing; it's that entire branch in Cosham. Certainly with Lloyd's, who are closing out all the Sainsbury's that they're doing, that's clearly to do. It's commercial, that they're just thinking it's not worth us sort of carrying on. So I think that is that kind of rationalising the estate kind of thing, because again, I do think the funding model for pharmacies is pretty old and creaking, and with these big organisations, they're still going to have a lot of pharmacies that are viable, and they're going to have huge amounts of branches across the country. It's just going to be making sure the ones they've got are more profitable. The elephant in the room as well, of course, is online pharmacies, and that is the real. So we do have an online pharmacy that's based in Portsmouth, for example. Of course, most of their business is nowhere near Portsmouth. I think I heard the biggest supplier of medications, pharmacy medications in the city, is based in Leeds.
Right.
And so there's a big online pharmacy, and I think they've seen the stats, and they're sent for Leeds. That's where their warehouse is. So that is a big challenge, and that's why, in a way, that business side of it as well, if we can get people going to their local community pharmacy, because A, it's round the corner from home, and B, it's a good experience for them to maybe think, oh, I can get this, that, and the other. Yeah, and that can be a real positive.
Yeah, because you mentioning online pharmacies, of course, I should imagine, and I'm completely guessing at this, but I'd imagine that the people that probably tend to use those would be the people that are either time poor or have poor mobility, but are using them for repeat prescriptions, repeat prescriptions are probably the very customers that the local pharmacies rely on as their as kind of, they know that that's a quote unquote steady part of their customer base and their income. I guess if that's taken away those customers from the local community pharmacies, is that kind of causing a dent? Is it, speaks to the wider kind of situation in the switch to online services that's hitting lots of other sectors as well? Is that kind of what the sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It is because, as you say, people who are able to go online will often use online for all kinds of stuff, and that includes obviously medications. I think one of the particular things is, and again, this is why for community pharmacies, because you often have to pay postage, etc., for these things. So it does actually add a cost to, because if you got a prescription, it's a flat fee, no matter what the and again, this all comes into the contract about expensive drugs and all that kind of thing, because it's a flat fee for everyone, for no matter what their prescriptions are, and it's about what they get on top there. So it is a real concern, and it's about, as I say, if you can give value added, and you can people really understand why having your because it is the old thing of use it or lose it. Because if people do not use their community pharmacies, and let's remember, most of our community pharmacies in Portsmouth are either Portsmouth-based businesses with quite a few branches, or they are we've got a few single-handed pharmacies, or they're not that big. We have got obviously big organisations like Rowlands, for example, but most of our pharmacies in the city are either locally owned ones with a few branches, or we have single-handers. And talk about Cosham, obviously in Cosham you've got the one I used to use when I used to work there, on the corner with Vectis Roads, and that's a independent pharmacy. And that's the that's the kind of thing that you just start to get your real concerns about, because actually, again, if they're local businesses, then they are going to be reflective of the local community and have that real pull. Whereas if they're big national things, as we've seen with Boots and we've seen with Lloyd's, pulling out of an area is just, well, it's pulling out of an area. It's
just one of their many shops where
exactly it doesn't really mean anything to them, which is, as I say, can be really concerning.
An interesting point there, Matthew. So again, if we've touched on the challenge of those, the internet pharmacy, the online provider, those challenges and those problems look nationwide. So if we look at Portsmouth as a whole, is the position in Portsmouth any better or worse than the national picture? You've touched that there are, some local networks. Where do we stand as a city at the moment compared to the rest of the UK?
So you're quite right. Obviously, there are national issues. The issues with recruitment for pharmacies, I think, that's the particular issue that we have, and I was on BBC South on I think aired on Friday, and obviously they came to the summit on Wednesday, and I said it's coastal communities. So coastal communities do have a particular issue right across the health and social care sector. So we found this originally with GPs. We know we have this issue as well with pharmacists. Partially it's because your recruitment has to come all from, 180 degrees as opposed to 360. And that's just
geography.
It's just the reality.
Yeah.
It's the reality of being on the coast. But it does cause that particular issue. One of the big things we're doing, I mentioned about, we had university student with us. We also had people from the university themselves at the summit. Was about the training up of local pharmacists at the university and retaining them. We know that that's a real bonus, but it's for us to make the most of that. But you have this perverse situation now, and this came up, and I didn't know about this. So when they do their training, they are allocated to anywhere in the country. You don't have any control. So someone does their pharmacy degree, they then have to go and do their sort of formal training to become a fully registered pharmacist. But they're allocated randomly. So I think within a reasonable distance. But it is literally anywhere, and you used to be able to kind of retain a certain amount to a local area, but you can't do that now. It's you basically bid for them. So pharmacies bid for these pharmacy graduates, and that causes real issues in terms of, because a lot of people, we know Portsmouth University has a pretty good retention rate for people who do their degrees here, who stay in Portsmouth or in the Portsmouth area. With pharmacies now, this happens. You can't do that. You haven't got. So even if someone goes there, I really like Portsmouth, I really love to stay here, they then get their placement in Buckinghamshire or something like that. Once you moved up there, you might really like a place, but you think, oh well, I'm up here now. Maybe I'll meet someone. You know, I've got accommodation. I've made some friends. Do I really want to go back? So we know we're fighting against that, and obviously that's an issue that happens with every university now that trains pharmacists. But it is that particular issue with coastal communities that we do have that. I think, however, the thing that we do have that's different from everywhere else is we have a history of integration and close working across the health and social care sector, including the council. And also we have networks like Shaping Portsmouth. So we had one of Raj Lally from who's on the board of Lally's Pharmacy. His dad set up the business a few decades ago now, but he's actually a local GP as well, and so he has that sort of double perspective. And he actually made a comment about how much integration and working together there is in Portsmouth, and looking for solutions to these kind of things compared to elsewhere where Lally's operates. And then obviously within the network, they know, you go to other parts of the country, you don't have that kind of proactive attitude. It will be very much, it's all siloed.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that, and it's almost a spoiler for our next question, which was okay. So yeah, can you speak a bit more to how effective in Portsmouth the link is between GPs and pharmacies then, and how does that differ to elsewhere?
Yeah, so so one of the issues that I know community pharmacists are struggling with now is that a lot of GPs surgeries or medical centres have their own pharmacists, and that's actually quite an attractive career path for newly qualified pharmacists to go into, to want to go into GP surgeries or medical centres. And we'll try and get there. Because of the nature of it, because if you look at some of the issues that community pharmacists have, is that they are you do have that social behaviour aspect. You do have the fact that there are, we have pharmacists unfortunately who are threatened, community pharmacists who are threatened. We have dealing with people who see they're on the high street, they're on a street, people think they're medical professionals, they can help me. So when they're in mental health crisis, etc., and so actually, and they're long hours as well, because we're talking about especially if you're late night pharmacies, it's quite so. It's in the same way, ironically, that GPs that are trying to recruit GPs is less attractive than working at a hospital, which you might think is slightly perverse, but it's because of the nature of it that number of GPs are going down and number of hospital doctors are going up. So while doctors are going up over the boards, there are less GPs now than there used to be, because the proportion used to be the other way around. You used to have more GPs than hospital doctors, and now it's going the other way. So because of the pressures on community pharmacy, you're starting to get this thing of, actually, I'll go and work in my local surgery instead and be a pharmacist there, or in the hospital or whatever, because your hours tend to be more set. Your back room as opposed to front facing, so there does tend to be it has a bit of an image issue. But with the GPs, so with a GP and a pharmacist, it's mixed. I mean, so for some where you have a pharmacy next to a surgery, actually they tend to have very close relationships and good relationships. Other places, you have a surgery, it's on its own. They have a farm. So in Caution, for example, because you've got the surgery just off the high street, and then you've got a couple of pharmacies around the corner. That relationship's going to be there, and it's practical. if on the other hand you've got like my surgery, sorry, not my surgery, Craneswater group practice, which is if you've got the Salisbury Road one, for example, there's no pharmacy anywhere near there really. So a lot of the people who are using that are going to be going all over the place to their pharmacy. So so when you've got a pharmacy close by, that can create a relationship. When it's the surgery's here and you go wherever, that's there.
So is that partly because there's been some consolidation, hasn't there, in the GPs, especially in the general practice sector, where to be honest with you, where practices have amalgamated and you know, kind of merged onto fewer sites? Is that kind of part of the thing then? If part of the operating model of some of the existing community pharmacies is they're relying on being very, very close geographically to an existing GP surgery, but then that GP surgery suddenly shuts and moves, you know, somewhere, you know, several streets away because it's being merged with a larger practice or whatever. Is that kind of part of the thing and if the pharmacies are like out on their own, like you say, for the hours that they're doing, I can see how that's a less attractive proposition than being somewhere where it's a co-located site where it's safer. You know that there's actually, you know, there's better security, there's better availability of kind of resources. Are we just kind of seeing a reaction in the pharmacy sector to respond to what's happened to GP surgeries? Perhaps is that?
I don't think it's particularly clear cut, because actually a few of the pharmacies that have closed, or where the operator's closed and now we're looking to get, you know, or someone else is going to come in, are actually nowhere near. They weren't near surgeries anyway. So I don't think we can do a direct correlation between them. And indeed, so for example, the Elm Grove pharmacy, which I used to live literally above the building next door many years ago. So I know that one really well. When that closed, I mean, before they closed, they were having queues of people outside. So it was, and people coming from a myriad of surgeries, different surgeries, using that pharmacy. So I don't think that's really got anything to do with the ones that particularly are closing down, are because there was a surgery nearby and now there isn't. But that's not to say that hasn't affected the business. And again, that's where, you know, if a surgery closes and you've got a pharmacy which was next door, then that could have a big drop off.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't think, just thinking about where the surgeries have closed in recent times and merged, I don't think there's been many where that's been the case.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and I think you have to forgive us, Matthew. We've always got we do sometimes have a bit of a local bias in that. Obviously, the Cosham Health Centre relocated and Boots as far as we might be drawing cause and effect ourselves as locals that may not be mirrored across the sector. Now, you've touched on some of the blockers that the pharmacies are experiencing. You know, is there scope for pharmacies to perhaps extend the range of services they provide? I think you touched on prescribing. You know, is it about reshaping, you know, what a pharmacy is and how it's perceived by the public?
Absolutely, and the thing is, this is the irony of all of this, is that the pharmacists actually would like to do this. They would like to do more, and they want to do more. But one of the things to do with recruitment and capacity is that they just don't have that. They're not able to. And this, as we have prescribing pharmacists, I mean, and this is why we had this as a particular focus at one of the tables at the summit, was about how do you make the most of that. Bear in mind, everyone who qualifies is going to be a prescribing pharmacist, and also you've got a lot of existing pharmacies who want to have that certification to be prescribing pharmacists. how do you make the most of that when recruitment of pharmacists in community pharmacies is an issue? So so it's all like your cause and effect. If you can get your community pharmacist numbers stable and as many as you need, then that you're in a great place, because then that enables you to do more. It also takes pressures off the medical centres from your GPs and your nurses and your occupational therapists and your physios, etc., and they go into that place. So when you do say you've got an issue with your medication, maybe you've been prescribed new medication and you're not sure about it, go and talk to your pharmacist rather than going to your GP, because as any GP will tell you, actually pharmacists, when it comes to actual medication, side effects, how it works, all that kind of thing, they're your professional experts. They know more about medication than anyone else, because that is their entire that's their job. That's their entire the entire focus of their profession. So it's all about it, but the blocker. So to come back to that, it really is about that. Is about the capacity, and also when we talked about those things to do with issues with people coming in with mental health issues, issues where there's safety and security issues. So that's all about that sort of preventative thing. If we can, so one of the things that we found that community pharmacists didn't know, for example, was that we have this new mental health hub. So in the pack that we gave out at the summit, we had the information about the "You Are Not Alone," which is our slogan for our mental health hub, and that they can then get they can ring up on behalf of the people who come in, or do that, rather than it gets to a crisis stage and then they're ending up with calling an ambulance or 111. It escalates, and of course that takes up a lot of time, which they will do, but it's if that can be kind of, there's more proactive way of reducing the time, and also, as I say, that's safety and security side, which the police and our community safety team at the council as well can really sort of engage with them to give them some support about how they can better do that. And of course, wider business community, because we know, shoplifting is endemic at the moment. There's a huge amount, whether it's for cost of living and whatever, but we know there's so much shoplifting going on. And part of that is about, right, okay, what are other businesses doing to try and tackle that? So I think a lot of that is, if we can take away a lot of those things that are taking up a lot of their time, then they have more time to do those more services and helping more people, but also but that's also important about recruitment and retention as well.
And I guess what's unfolding for me, Matthew, as we've been through this conversation, is it feels to me like there's a piece here about educating the public, because I guess if I'm, and again, I'll be a little provocative here, it almost sounds like the role of the pharmacist is either, and I know this isn't their role, but they could be perceived as sort of glorified shop assistants. I go in, I buy some toothpaste, some razors, and I'll pick up my prescription while I'm here. Or in those late night environments, they're almost acting as a kind of first responder. There's an element of it's almost, the picture I'm sort of that's unfurling is I can see why there might be a recruitment and retention problem, but is that as much to do with the fact that perhaps the public just don't understand the role of pharmacists?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one, because I think their feeling within the health and social care sector is that, and this is one of the things why they partially feel out on a limb, is that amongst some, and absolutely not all, but there is almost a perception that pharmacists are, as you say, almost glorified shopkeepers. Yeah, they're shopkeepers, as opposed, whereas is actually the converse is true about the general public. The general public, say, often has very good relationships with their pharmacists, especially those who use them a lot. and that they see them as they are a trusted medical professional. So you get this kind of dichotomy between what's almost the perception is, or the long kind of thing, and they're out there doing something else, because they always have to have that overtly commercial side to their business. But on the other side, you also have those, you have the public who actually has the thing of, they see them in the same way as their experts, especially those who have used pharmacists other than, I go to the pharmacist and get my medication, who have been in a consultation room, had a chat with the pharmacist, and actually found out how professional and knowledgeable they are. And so you get this dichotomy where actually their reputation amongst the public is very positive, and that they see them as a professional. Maybe within the sector, they are kind of the forgotten bit of primary care. And just going back to another thing I just thought of in terms of capacity, one of the things that also came out at the summit was, how can we support development of people within pharmacists, so staff, so especially thinking about pharmacy technicians. How can we support them to go forwards in terms of maybe getting to the point where they can either become pharmacists, or they can do more professional development as well. So that was something that the university, again, was really important to have there, about what kind of professional development courses we might be able to do, and also from the shop assistants as well, because of course some are literally retail, but they might want to get into more of that kind of on the medical side of things.
Yeah, so if there's, I guess that makes sense, doesn't it? Like you say, for the retention and development, if you can get into that business, and you can see that there's actually a clear career path for you, that it and no disparagement to operating until, but there's, if you want to kind of go something actually beyond that, they do sound like they're being highly trained medical professionals. The people that actually use them to the fullest of their capability sound like they're reporting well on actually what that experience is. But maybe there's a whole gap in the public understanding of actually that's something that they can that their local pharmacist can be helping them with, when they are actually struggling to perhaps to get appointments or to get medical attention or advice through other means at the moment. It does seem a bit of a shame that we've got these highly trained people that perhaps aren't being used to the fullest of their capabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And something again we talked about was actually getting into schools. So schools, getting those connections in, and actually saying about pharmacy is a really good career path, because people, that's the thing about people thinking that pharmacy is a fantastic career path, and it can be something they could really move forward with, and everything. So it's I mean, there's so many pathways, and just thinking about it rather than we're a pharmacist, it's just us. We're a community pharmacist, it's just us, and we have to try and come up with these solutions on our own. How can we work together on this in a much more holistic way?
And talking of that, working together, it's almost like we prepared all of this. So that you've spoken about the situation with pharmacies, and you mentioned a bit earlier on about GP Summit. So all of these things are interrelated, but what people seem to be quite often talking about is problems getting to see their GP, or problems, or near impossibility to get to see a dentist. What sorts of things are happening in those fields?
So one of the things we did with the GP Summit on the Wednesday before was actually, we said, is there anything in particular you want to feed into the pharmacy summit? So though they're separate, and we think it's right to keep them separate to make sure that they get the focus that they deserve, that they are ones that sort of both ways feed in. So now our GP summits are going to be annual, so we're going to have one every year. The pharmacist one, we are going to do a follow-up in probably in spring next year, so in about 4 or 5 months' time. just some progress on some of the bits and pieces. And I would imagine we'll probably have another one in the future. We'll probably do it more of an ad hoc, because it's something we've got less overall control with. And actually, if we get the pharmacist working with the right people, I think a lot of that work can sort of multiply on its own. Whereas when we talk about the GPs, we've got a lot of those are stuff, because we've got potential for a medical school opening up at the university, for example, and the aspiration is that they would have GPs. They would focus on GPs and training GPs. We've got other bits and pieces to do with which, because of course the thing with GPs as well is, of course, it comes directly from, it's all government funding. So that's a different thing, and also you have to work completely within this single structure of how the funding works with integrated care systems. So with so that's going to be an annual thing, but it's all about these things feed in. And actually, if we get things moving well with pharmacists, I think potentially the future GP summits, as we called it, it's always had a bit more of a general primary care focus anyway. So, for example, Simon, who's the head of the integrated care boards, which to do with not just pharmacists but dentists as well. He's actually a pharmacist by trade, and so he's a trained pharmacist. He has dentists as well. He's been to each of our GP summits. So that's where all that kind of connecting in comes. But also, as I say, I think linking the pharmacists up with Shaping Portsmouth in the business community, I think that's one of the most key things. And a lot of the stuff to do with funding, we know pharmacist funding is very, very complicated, but that's something that has to take place at that much higher level, especially to do with contracts. But what we can do as an organisation is saying we can then go upwards. On the dentist side, obviously, we've had the earlier this year we had the extra however many thousand, 100-odd thousand extra hours of NHS treatments, which we now have in the city. It's not enough, and that lobbying goes on. So it's that one. I think it's almost a much clearer line, because we know that the real issue we have is about people being able to access NHS dentists. Interestingly, now dentistry is being brought from regional to the integrated care system, the responsibility for NHS dental contracts. So actually, for us, that fits in very, very clearly now with the work we do within that system. I'm on the integrated care partnership joint committee, and I'm on the rotation for chair of that. We've got obviously we have a member of the integrated care board from Portsmouth City Council, as well as we have input from the local integrated care within our local health and care system. So a lot of that stuff to do with dentists is very clear down the line, and hopefully in future we won't have some of these the nonsense we had earlier this year when we got the extra time for NHS dentistry, but we weren't allowed to tell anyone where they were, because we weren't told ourselves, and we actually because this was region taking control, and they would not. They said you can't let them know, even the local authority know, even the cabinet member know where these things are. So we found out where they were because people said, I've seen an advertisement out at this dentist saying we've got NHS places. Really? Yeah, well, they didn't tell. Yeah. And Joe, who was our who is leaving at the end of the month, but she's been our very, very good. She was our she used to run the CCG effectively when we had that the clinical commissioning group, and which is now been merged into the integrated care system and the integrated care boards. But she was so embarrassed because she was told in no uncertain terms, you cannot tell anyone where these places will be. So that was under region. Now we're under the more local system. So things like that should be, and that means we can directly influence, because we can say, right, you've got you manage the contracts now. We need more, or whatever it might be. I mean, I think that's going to be a real lobbying thing. And obviously within dentists, that's been something that's been very positively interacted with by both MPs as well. So obviously Penny brought she did a dental summit about a year or so ago, which kind of worked in with what we were doing already at the council and within the system. But I think that's been one where it's much clearer that we can do things in a particular way, whereas because it's all about, if we just need more contracts here for pharmacy and for GPs, it's much more. It's because so much of it is about recruitment.
So I guess that leads us to our final question, Matthew, which is that, you touched on the great power of the council to bring people together, and it sounds like, a lot of positive dialogue has been had. How do you ensure that when the talking stops, that there will be positive actions that will come out of this that will benefit the people of Portsmouth?
Yeah, so obviously everything that came out of the summit, we're compiling everything. So a huge amount of stuff came. So be compiling everything that will then go out to everyone who both attended and weren't able to attend. So and then there'll be actions there. So that will be about how we do that. And as I say, the most important thing is a follow up. And then we can say, you said, we did. So that was a really clear thing. In the GP summit we did in sort of the week before, obviously it was almost a year since we'd done the last sort of follow-up one, and it was about you said, we did, and also where things we were hoping to make some progress on this, but it's been stalled for whatever reason. Any ideas how we can help to move that forward? So that's the real thing. I think overall, in terms of differences people will notice, is that if we can stop any more closures, or at least make sure we don't have any gaps. We now have something that we've done independently. I said right at the start that the way that what they call the pharmaceutical needs assessment works now is changed. So we can now say, this is somewhere where we need the pharmacy. If a pharmacy operator pulls out, then we can insist that someone comes in. We can also stop mergers. So there was actually a merger we stopped. I think it was we stopped a merger in Hilsea. We because they wanted to an operator wanted to close the pharmacy there and say, oh, we've got one down in, I think it was North End, that they could go to instead, and we actually stopped that happening. If a pharmacy closes now, or they say an operator says we want to close this pharmacy, we can say we still need a pharmacy operator there, and we can proactively go out and recruit a pharmacy operator to come in, because that's now a gap. You have that power now as the local health wellbeing board to do that. So you've got a lot more power to say this is where we need it. In Cosham's case, unfortunately, where you have a oversaturation, you can't do that. So we couldn't put any anything against Boots closing, because there's still two pharmacies literally on the same road. So you can't. But we would hope that if we do things in the right way, that we won't have any parts of the city that are currently served by pharmacies that don't have anything, and that will really work through, and also by people feeling like we know what we can use pharmacies for, and when we go in there, we're going to get a good service, and actually they can do more than we thought they could before.
Perfect. Well, that's a perfect spot to end it, Matthew. Thank you, after such a busy week, for giving us so much of your time. You've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And our guest this evening has been Councillor Matthew. Oh, and he said Atkinson.
Oh, good Lord! Oh no!
Oh no!
All
Sorry.
the Matthews.
Fix that in post.
Okay, right. Okay, sorry. And our guest has been Councillor Matthew Winnington. What I was meant to say was that next week we're going to be taking a look at Jeremy Hunt's autumn statement. So do join us at 6:27 next week. Do like, follow, subscribe, etc. To make sure you get those notifications. But also the following week on December the 3rd, we'll be holding the another of our ward reports. We've got all three ward councillors from Cosham Ward. So that is Councillor Matthew Atkins, Ashgar Shah and Mary Vallely, and they'll be speaking to us about what the issues are in their ward and what they've been hearing from residents and what they've been working on. So do join us next week at 6:27, where hopefully I'll get the names right.